Welcome to Unboxing Fulfillment, the modern B2C fulfillment podcast. I'm your host, Chad Warzecha. Our guest today is Lori Gibson, who is Director of Consulting Services at Johnson Stevens Consulting. Lori is a consultant that works with companies to improve supply chain and distribution operations through the right strategies and technology. She's a trained industrial engineer with more than 20 years of supply chain consulting experience, particularly in the areas of warehouse design and optimization, lean process improvement, and labor productivity. We'll for sure hit on all of those issues, but we're going to deep dive today on how best to calculate ROI for warehouse automation. And personally, I'm pretty excited with this topic that we've chosen today for the podcast. Amware Fulfillment has been on a pretty rapid automation cycle over the past few years. So hopefully I learn a few things along the way in the conversation, as well as our guests. So Lori, it's a long introduction because it's a long background, but welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Glad to talk to you.
So am I. It's more relevant than it ever has been.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that.
Before we maybe begin and get deep into it, maybe just a better introduction from yourself than I gave you. I think our guests would love to hear how you kind of wound up doing what you are doing and the path that led you here today.
Sure. So I'm a Georgia Tech industrial engineer. Proud of that. And one of my first job really out of school was I went to work for, and I'll say the company, I went to work for Neiman Marcus as one of their industrial engineers in their distribution center. So I kind of got into basically the whole distribution center, supply chain operations pretty quickly. That distribution center was really more distributing to the stores, but started off there, worked there for a couple years and went back and got an MBA. And coming out of that, I went to work for another consulting firm that basically did the same thing and actually had Neiman Marcus as one of their clients and kind of got into the industry that way. Kind of bumped around. It took a few years off and then came back and with another consulting firm, which is Johnson Stevens, which I've been with for about 14 years. And then we've actually been integrated into Hy-Tek Intralogistics. And so starting at the beginning of the year, we're the consulting division for that company. And so that's how I've been in it. And honestly, it's something I've enjoyed. And to your point, nobody really heard much about supply chain before COVID and knew not a lot about, but because of that, supply chain's now on the front. Everybody knows about the supply chain and is concerned and understands the importance of it. And especially with with e-commerce and direct fulfillment, it's extremely important factor in that.
What a great background and a great industry. I know that we both share the love for it. At Amware, where we typically are focused on a lot of small to mid-sized companies that are growing, that are we're enabling their growth or on some type of scaling or trajectory. But I'm curious, with your consulting background, what are some of the assignments that you might involve yourself with similar type of clients?
Yeah, and I think the first thing we typically would do is come in and do some type of a process or capacity optimization project. And that really comes in and just looking at your operation as a whole and saying, okay, is there any low-hanging fruit here of what can be done? And you talked about lean improvement, and it's really taking a step back and doing lean improvement. That means doing a process flow and really looking at how your product flows from when it comes in the door to when it comes out, and what are those opportunities that you have for optimizing that. And that could be, doing the 4 Ps of purpose, process, product, and people. And then also looking at where, if there's any waste in your system, and that could be waste in motion, waste in time and waiting for product to get where it needs to be, inventory, utilization, a whole bunch of things, and looking and kind of going through that whole industrial engineering process, which has been around for a long time, but that's really, especially in small organizations, when you start and you kind of organically grow, You just start a system and think, oh, we need to do this, and really haven't thought out the process. And if you can really do that, even before considering any automation, you can really tighten up your operation and really get better productivity, better throughput, and better utilization of the assets that you already have.
Yeah, I was going to say before the automation, you're saying, is it a step before you think about automation, or is it in parallel to automation?
I think you could do it both ways. I think it's a good way to come in and just look at your overall operation. And even before you start really planning automation, I think it's a good thing to go ahead and get that, and especially that process map that you start with. That's going to be what you're going to be able to use. Having a really good design and understanding of the flow of your products going to help you understand where you can use automation, where the best places for it to use, and how you can use that automation. So developing this and getting all your systems right, I think you would either do in conjunction, and you may find that you get enough out of it that maybe automation isn't needed right at the moment, but that you can plan for it and see where the need is. And so that's how we would go in initially. What we typically do is we come in and we would do this process optimization. And then in conjunction of that, we would do what we call technology assessments, where we would look at your operation and kind of determine what types of technologies might work best for your operation. And then what we would do is basically developing this ROI, do a technology assessments that kind of determines if this is the right fit for you or not.
Do you have, Lori, when you're doing the assessments, do you have kind of a catalog, or is it just through experience that says you go into a facility and you're watching the process flow and you're trying to solve whatever problem, but are they just kind of like on the shelf solutions from your experience that says, yeah, a pick to light would work in this environment, or a carton erector? Or how do you go about choosing the right automation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think what you have to look when you're talking about choosing the right automation, I think there are a couple of things to look forward to. Number one, where are your capacity constraints, right? So where do you need, do you not have enough labor? Do you need things that are going to reduce labor? I mean, that's pretty much everybody in this industry right now. Is there things, do you need to increase your throughput? Is that as capacity a problem? Is your throughput a problem? Looking at where those constraints are, and then finding the technology that works there. And also just looking at your processes. Some things we may look at, like you talked about a carton erector. You may have so many different size cartons, or you may not have enough throughput that it doesn't make sense. So some of that's, I'd say some of that's our knowledge and kind of looking, maybe if you have a smaller system, we're not probably going to do an assessment on a huge goods to picker type process, but there may be other things. But we'll look at a wide range of solutions, like you said, coming even from the receiving line all the way through put away, picking, packing, and your shipping, and kind of determine what makes sense in those, and look at those and kind of come up with a whole package of things that make for your whole system. Maybe one or two will come out, maybe three or four, but kind of develop that whole network of automation that works for your environment.
When somebody engages you, Lori, do most clients or prospects, are they typically engaging you? And I'm speaking, specifically kind of from the B2C fulfillment perspective. But do most clients approach you because they want to reduce labor, or are they approaching you to just increase throughput, save costs? Like what angle? And I know the answer is all, but
it is. I think that's.
Yes, I say, does one? Are we in an environment right now where one's kind of leaning as the primary reason for automation?
I think right now in this day and age, it really is labor reduction, labor save, getting the most out of the people that you have and being able to utilize them to the best of the ability. I think that's really, in the last 3 to 4 years become really, really important. And I think as you've seen, I'm sure all of your, everybody who's listening who kind of is involved in this, it's not just the people, it's the wage rates that have really increased. And what that does when you're looking at a piece of technology, if you're looking at it, even though prices have come up, but so as the labor cost has come up so much, that, is we're finding it easier to justify some technologies than we used to, just because of the cost that it takes to have the people. And then some people just cannot find. It's become more of an issue of not even how much the labor costs, but not being able to find enough people, reaching a ceiling of people that you can keep on your, in your warehouse or in your distribution center. So that becomes another constraint.
You always, typically hear of all of, the shiny new toys in a fulfillment environment, and it all sounds really, really good. But does it ever go wrong? When has implementing automation been, the wrong thing to do or a mistake?
Yeah, it definitely has. Won't mention any names. We had a recent client that we came in to do a capacity optimization, and they do some, B2C, some wholesale, but they had bought a goods to picker type system that was really highly automated, really just high end, and it was sitting in the middle of their distribution center, and they weren't using it because of a couple of things. Number one, if they would have run an ROI on it, I think that, they wanted something new, they wanted something that was going to help them, but I don't think that they really ran the numbers. And when we looked at it, the ROI on if they would have bought it really would have been 10 to 15 years. It just wasn't the right solution for them. And then the other thing that happened once they got it in, they realized they didn't know what to put in this solution. It wasn't big enough for all their SKUs, but when they tried to start determining which SKUs would go in there, they realized that they had a put wall that kind of went with it, that the put wall wasn't sized correctly. So they could get more product into the goods to picker, but it wouldn't fit in the put wall based on the way that they'd done it. So then they had to go back and resize. And we actually spent a good amount of time determining which SKUs and which product made sense to put in there that would get them the utilization out of it that they needed. So I think, it ended up where we could find a solution that they could keep it and make it work. But really, we were just trying to justify the cost that they were spending on it on an ongoing basis and some of the changes they had to make. And it barely broke even that way. So I think I think people do get excited in the shiny. They get but then they don't. I think what you definitely have to do is make sure that it does have a payback. It's the right solution. Might not be the right solution for you. There are a lot of things out there. So, if you jump into something really big, maybe that makes sense. Maybe you start small, and then it's something that you can look at in 3 to 4 years when you get to a certain threshold, knowing what those thresholds are, volume. So if you get to a certain threshold, that's when this makes sense. But up until that point, it might not. I think that's another point. But then also making sure that when you select something, that you have the right support, that when you start to use it, you don't just get this shiny new piece of equipment, it's dropped off, it's installed. Now what do we do with it and how do we utilize it? Making sure that you have a plan and that you understand how to correctly use it and integrate it within your system.
That's interesting. So the example that you gave where somebody put the technology in and maybe it sat idle or it wasn't fully utilized, was there a financial detriment or an impact other than it not realizing its ROI? Or I guess that was the detriment. They invested the money and didn't get their money out of it.
You're exactly right. That was pretty much it. And there was some ongoing costs because this piece of equipment, actually, they had to pay a certain amount of maintenance fee annually to have somebody there to do it. So they were investing this money year after year. Number one, they'd invested initially for the purchase of it, and then they were having this ongoing cost. So, that was the detriment. And, it was also taking up space that they could have utilized for something else.
I was saying, so they had a problem and they just made it worse by choosing the wrong automation in this example, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think that the thing is that money, had they looked into some other technologies, the money could have been better used to really do some other things that would have really helped the overall throughput of the business instead of where they spent it. I think that's a good question, because I think it's that opportunity cost, right? That they lost that investment that now they could have used to really make a bigger impact somewhere else if it was spent a different way.
So that's a really good segue into ROI. for the other nerds on the phone, like I am when it comes to this. So what's the industry right now kind of saying in terms of, a traditional ROI timeframe, when you're interacting with different clients and they want an ROI for that piece of technology? What's common for a put wall or a lights or something of that sort, or goods to person? Are we 2 years, 3 years? Is it 5, 10? What's the horizon typically right now?
It's really all over the board, and it really varies very highly between customers and clients that we have. I'd say 2 to 3 is typical. What most people are looking at is a 2 to 3 year payback. We have some customers who won't do anything if it doesn't have one. And then we have some that are happy with 5 if we can show, and I think this has happened more and more recently. I think if you can show a significant reduction in headcount, that some clients are willing to say, okay, we can go 4 to 5 years if we know that, it's a payback, but we're going to definitely reduce headcount, then we'll be able to accept that. So it's a little bit all over, but I'd say 2 to 3 is typical.
Okay. And labor, the first thing you think of always is labor, but what other factors typically are considered space, to optimize space and to generate more revenue in a facility? What are other areas that you consider when thinking about ROI beyond the labor savings?
Yeah, so those are typically the ones we look at. The labor save is the one, and then also the space. If there's some kind of a cost avoidance that you can get, maybe you don't like when you're talking about space, if you're at the capacity of your facility and you don't have to maybe utilize offsite storage or expand your building. If it can, increase the life of your building, that's a definite one. I think there's some qualitative factors too that are also considered maybe, and those are some things that if you look at the ROI, if it's a service issue, if this helps the throughput and you can get customers served in a 24-hour period as opposed to maybe what your current standard, if your SLA is, it can improve that. Also, there are a lot of accuracy improvements that can be had by adding some technology in there. Just that from your inventory and also making sure your customers getting what they want, those checks, those are really important too. Because you could even if you went to it for that accuracy, if you know that there's some kind of a cost to getting something to the customer, the wrong product, if you can evaluate a product, you could kind of convert that into some kind of a cost.
So I always find that to be tough, right? The labor is straightforward, but like maybe the throughput is, but like order accuracy and inventory improvement, how do you calculate that? Or are there like common mistakes people make when trying to, I'm not saying overreach, those are valid, but I mean, when you start to go outside of labor and you say, hey, we can serve customers better, time in transit, throughput, inventory, order accuracy, how do you measure those from an ROI perspective? I would assume people make a lot of miscalculations in those formulas from time to time.
Yeah, and typically we don't include those because just for the reasons that you said there, unless a client really has an issue with accuracy and they can say it's costing us, they've calculated that. I think you're right. I think it's a little soft to be able to come up with a number on that. If you do have that, you could kind of add it in, but I think it's something that you would like to get the ROI based on your space and labor. And maybe those are one of those things that if you're close, maybe it's showing and you're kind of which way or the other, and you can add this in and say, this is an additional benefit. That's usually how we like to look at that, as something that may tip the scale.
Okay. I was going to ask you that. That was another question I was going to follow up on. How do you get C-suites to be more open-minded to the investment, to getting, these capital expenditures approved? Is it in addition to the ROI? I guess it's the added benefits that don't have necessarily values attached, but things that we just talked about. You really emphasize other benefits like that.
Right, exactly. And we do a lot of that where we work a lot of times the people that we work with are the operations people, and we sit down and we work with them. And if this is something that they're trying, they need to get in through the C-suite, I think developing that good business case is really important. Showing them what that capital, what their save is, developing that really good ROI and having all the background and all the backup to prove it. Some information on the technology. There are a lot of new ones that are out there, but there are a lot of, really good tried and true technologies, and that you can show some really good, and making sure you have all your facts and figures, what the productivity rate is for each option and for what you have now, what that improvement's going to be. And I think if you can really build a good base case, business case, and have all of those factors included, plus the qualitative things that show, look, we also think we're going to get a better accuracy. We're going to have better throughput. We're going to have, it's easier to train people. People learn quicker when they, when put to lights really, if you have a lot of turnover, but we can train somebody in, 2 days, they can be up and running 100%. Those are really good factors that you can bring in, as much information that you can bring in about what that technology is going to help with.
I guess after all of that, and you submit the baseline for the base case for the approval business case, and you still have decision makers kind of stalling or not ready to have that decision point made. What does it come down to? Why do people still hold off on the approval? Do you suppose, after you've baselined it and justified it? What ultimately prevents people from pulling that automation trigger?
I think some of it's just the fear of the unknown and technology. And I think good things to do is, if you can work with somebody or whoever you're working with, if you can take people out and have a field trip and see something that's actually in operation. A lot of people will be able to do that, either if you work with consultants or integrators, or even the direct with the manufacturer, the provider of the technology. And they can get you in and you can talk to people who've utilized that technology, and they can give you, information. I think that can help too, because if you haven't made that dive, it's a big capital investment. That's part of it too. Everybody's not sure. You've got, business growth projections that people usually planning, but then, everybody's nervous about what's going to happen next. And, do we really need this technology, or are we going to invest this money and then the market's going to drop? So I think it's I think it's a lot of all of that, just kind of the fear of that investment and the fear of the unknown.
That's what I personally like myself. I love going on the field trip. I love seeing the technology already in use somewhere, whether it's the integrator or the manufacturer or another company, and just talking to the associates. I feel like that's, for me personally, that's where I get the most satisfaction from when I'm on the fence oftentimes. So what do you think is, or how do you think, I should say, how do you think about some of this technology just going obsolete? So I think that's the other piece of why people stall. In the back of their minds, they're thinking, man, in 2 years, 3 years, my ROI is paid for, but there's new technology that's, developing, that's, coming through the pipeline and R&D or something. Is that a real thing where new technology is on the forefront, or is it like in our environment, like we got lights and put walls and goods to person and bots, and we're okay for a couple of years? Or do you think it's really emerging technologies above and beyond that right now?
I think we had a lot of technologies that have come on recently, and I think that the robots are improving and they're getting better and more useful. But I honestly, and I understand you always think something new is going to be out there, and there have been some improvements, but I think it's okay to go ahead and invest in a technology that you feel really good about, that if you work with a company that's there that can help you maybe transition to some of the new technologies. Maybe it's a new robot that they could replace your existing one with, that maybe has a little bit different capabilities if you're a modular system. And I think some of these technologies are going to be around for a long time. They're good. They're making some small improvements, but I think some of the old tried and true technologies still and automation still work really well. Some of the lower lower volume ones and that kind of thing. I think that's why it's good to kind of look where you're going and, maybe you're not and see what you're, planning for to see if you're going to have really big, huge, high growth. Maybe you plan for something small now and maybe not too much investment and knowing that's coming. But I agree. I think, I think there definitely going to be improvements in technology, but I think it's incremental. If that makes sense, I don't think it's going to be, I don't think you're going to see something that's going to come out in the next 3 or 4 years that's going to double productivity over something that's already out there.
Do you think in 5 years, for an example, I won't go as far out as 10, but in like 5 years, do you think the inside the four walls of a fulfillment center are dramatically different or certainly better? But would we walk in 5 years from now and be like, man, this really has been transformational? Or are we just in a kind of an incremental improvement stage, do you think, over the next 5 years?
I think it's incremental improvement. I think it's interesting with the amount of robots and some of those type of things. I wonder how much things will actually go to be more modular systems instead of, the traditional where you have the conveyor in and then the conveyor to the shipping dock, but maybe where you'll see robots more running around and doing kind of modular systems. So you're not buying a huge conveyor system, which is a lot of money, but maybe buying little robots that take product from place to place so that it's actually, those are kind of that help you with that incremental growth. You don't have to invest in the big system all at once. You can kind of grow with it. I think that's kind of the one thing that I've seen that's interesting, especially in fulfillment, that's interesting and could be going down that road.
I agree. I think it's probably module. I think it's how they integrate with, systems, integrate with the technology and how it evolves that way versus the traditional conveyance system that you're just fixed on some voice picking solution. It's likely bits and pieces of all coming together, which is good because there's a lot that's come to market and they're in different versions, right? 3 or 4 versions deep now. So it's exciting. And hopefully it does address some of these challenges that we have, whether it's labor or throughput or whatever fulfillment, facilities, test with right now. So I love it. It's a good time. Lori, where else can listeners right now go to just learn more about you or about your organization?
Yeah, you could go to our website. It's Hy-Tek Intralogistics.com, and there will be a site on there for consulting that has more information about our consulting division if you want to look into that. We also do integration, and then we also talked about, we didn't really get into the whole WES, WCS, all the control systems like you talked about, and I think that's actually, as we talk about going down and what's going to happen in the future, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of innovation in those systems that are controlling the, kind of working with the WMS or, acting as a WMS. So I think those are some things, but yeah, that's where you can find out more information about us.
Awesome thing. Yeah, that's the enabler, really, that kind of connects it all. And you got to be strong in that aspect for sure. Well, excellent. Lori, thank you very much. It's been a real joy and pleasure, and we'll hold on after the podcast and catch up on a few things, but thank you. And on behalf of our listeners, thank you. And this concludes our episode of Unboxing Fulfillment, the modern B2C fulfillment podcast. Stay safe, everyone.